Im Seon-ho is that average guy at work who keeps his head down and gets the job done. His only problem is that he has no problems. Now his boss is a completely different case. She is that woman who commands attention without even trying, farming achievements and project successes like it's a daily quest. Yeah, she's that kind of woman. As for our protagonist, his achievements are more focused on gaming and binge-watching anime series. Anyone can tell they should never have anything to do with each other. But the universe matchmaking system says no. Our protagonist just so happens to find out that she is his neighbor. Now his entire life is about to do a 360. At this point, if our protagonist doesn't want to play, he better pass the controller. The story begins in a high-rise office building. Inside, workers are busy talking about a trendy topic, the Tedo and Ijin tests. Our protagonist, Im Seon-ho, a 29-year-old designer at the company, seems invested in the conversation, treating the tests as something similar to the MBTI personality test. In response, one of his coworkers comments that he looks more like an Ijin-type guy. Seon-ho admits he hasn't taken the test yet, but he has no choice now because of the design project he was assigned. Excited, his female coworker offers to send him the link, but he simply tells her he's fine. He immediately starts typing on his keyboard. It turns out he is doing his own research. He learns that Tedo guys are described as proactive, self-driven, and confident, basically every quality associated with an alpha male. Seeing this, our protagonist quietly confirms to himself that he is nowhere close to being a Tedo guy. However, something else catches his attention. The report also includes a compatibility chart showing how these traits affect attraction. After reading it, our protagonist thinks to himself that if he is an Ijin guy, then he is naturally going to be attracted to Tedo-type girls. The traits of Tedo girls hardly need any explanation. They are the typical boss babe type, strong, confident, and natural alpha females. Naturally, as a beta male, our protagonist has no idea what girls like that are really like. Seeing how invested he is, his female coworker teases him, but our protagonist quickly explains that it's not like that. He is only looking into it because of the project. While they're on the subject, he admits that he can understand Eigen girls, but he has absolutely no clue about Tedo girls. In response, his female coworker simply tells him they already have one in the office. Hearing that, our protagonist pauses for a moment. He honestly doesn't understand how Hazian is related to being a Teto girl. He explains that Choi Ha-Ezian is the team leader of the product planning department. In other words, she is his boss. Furthermore, she is only a year or two older than him, yet she is the youngest team leader in the company. Just then, she catches him staring. Our protagonist immediately looks away. Unfortunately, she has already noticed him and calls out to him. After he confirms that he received the product design request, she playfully tells him that she needs it as soon as possible. Our protagonist agrees, quietly noting that she is always like this. She is incredibly self-driven, and with her personality and leadership skills, it is almost impossible for anyone to disagree with her. Watching her, our protagonist concludes that she is definitely a Teto girl. There is no denying it. She is the complete opposite of him. It's not like he is complaining, but someone like her lives in a completely different world from him. Even if he ends up liking her, there is no chance their lives will ever cross paths. The next scene takes us to our protagonist's apartment complex. He enters his apartment while calling out for Mansu. The little furball immediately runs over to him. Unfortunately, the cat isn't a fan of our protagonist's overly affectionate behavior. Seeing this, our protagonist apologizes for being a little late before feeding her. Meanwhile, he finally takes a moment to rest. He reflects on the events of the day, yet the image of Choi Ha-Ezian refuses to leave his mind. He figures it's thanks to her that his leaving work on time streak has finally been broken. Nonetheless, now that he's home, it's time to relax with some games. Just then, he notices Mansu sitting by the window. He walks over and opens the curtains for his cat. Looking outside has become one of Mansu's daily habits. But if it were our protagonist, this otaku would probably die before even thinking about doing something like that. As he thinks about it, he wonders why the first thing he sees after opening the curtain is something so unexpected. Then, recognition flashes across his eyes. He has just realized that he and Choi Ha-Ezian live in the same neighborhood, practically next door to each other. At that very moment, she turns toward his window with a surprised expression. It turns out she is simply surprised to see Mansu waving at her, and she finds the little cat absolutely adorable. Meanwhile, our protagonist manages to hide just in time. The poor guy is hyperventilating and on the verge of a panic attack as he wonders how this is even possible. Anyone in his situation would naturally be shocked after discovering that his gorgeous boss lives right next door. Our protagonist is still spiraling, unable to wrap his head around the fact that his boss is his neighbor. He is absolutely certain that someone else used to live there. Regardless, Imsiono decides to close the curtains first. However, his little furball chooses this exact moment to be stubborn. Seeing this, he anxiously tells his cat to stop. His voice immediately catches Choi Hae-seon's attention. Now our protagonist is sweating as he practically begs his cat to cooperate. Unfortunately, Mansu is furious. It seems the cat has decided that he absolutely does not want his owner looking at Choi Hae-seon. Without warning, Mansu hisses and leaps straight at our protagonist's face. Things escalate in an instant, and his boss just has to witness the entire spectacle. The moment our protagonist notices her staring, he rushes to shut the curtains. The poor woman is left standing there, completely confused about what she has just witnessed. Only then does our protagonist collapse onto the floor in relief, with Mansu still clinging stubbornly to his face. More than anything, he hopes Choi Hae-seon doesn't recognize him. Because if she does, she might completely misunderstand the situation and assume he was secretly staring at her while she was working out. Imsiono's imagination immediately runs wild. He pictures office rumors spreading, co-workers whispering behind his back, and everyone labeling him a creep. Still, he decides not to dwell on it for now. Instead, what really puzzles him is why someone like Choi Hae-seon is living in this neighborhood. The only real advantage of living here, he explains, is that his apartment is extremely close to work. Someone like Choi Hae-seon definitely earns a much higher salary than he does. A person in her position should be living somewhere in the city. Aside from the short commute, the biggest reason our protagonist enjoys living here is because he almost never runs into any of his coworkers. But now all of that is about to change. From now on, he'll have to be much more careful and carefully plan whenever he leaves the house. He even wonders if he should simply move out altogether just to avoid Choi Hae-seon. The next scene shifts to the office. Our protagonist inwardly complains. It turns out he has been waking up ridiculously early just to avoid running into Choi Hae-seon before work. As he wonders whether this is going to become his daily routine, one of his female coworkers greets him, commenting that he arrived unusually early today. He casually returns her greeting. She notices the dark circles under his eyes and jokingly asks if he spent the entire night gaming. When he shakes his head, she changes the subject and brings up the company's latest promotion, asking whether he'll be taking advantage of the employee discount. He corrects her, pointing out that it's a blackout curtain promotion, not a cat promotion. Regardless, she says she'll go make copies of the promotional flyers. Our protagonist's mood immediately drops a moment later. The reason is simple. Choi Hae-seon has just entered the office. She exchanges greetings with Anna, his female coworker. Meanwhile, our protagonist quietly plays detective. He carefully observes her interactions with the rest of their colleagues. Seeing her chatting so naturally and looking to be in such a good mood, he slowly convinces himself that she either didn't recognize him or has already forgotten everything that happened yesterday. Maybe he really was worrying over nothing. Just then, Choi Hae-seon's gaze suddenly shifts toward him. Our protagonist freezes, the instant her expression turns icy. A second later, she simply looks away as though something about him has irritated her. He has absolutely no idea what he has done wrong. Now he can only pray that she didn't recognize him after all, because he has no idea how he'll get himself out of this situation if she did. Unfortunately, his worst fear comes true. She walks straight over and slams her hand onto his desk, startling him. As our protagonist nervously responds, she continues staring down at him without saying a word, making him even more uneasy. Finally, she asks if he has a minute. He cautiously replies by asking what she wants. Crossing her arms, she says it's something very important. Our protagonist can't help thinking that she really is the classic Tio type of girl. Assertive, straightforward, and never afraid to say exactly what's on her mind. As he silently waits for what he believes is his inevitable execution, she suddenly leans closer. Our protagonist is completely stunned. Because after all that tension, the only thing she wanted to ask was whether they could have lunch together later. The next chapter opens at a restaurant. Inside, Choi Hae-seon can hardly wait to dig into the feast laid out before her. She thanks our protagonist for the meal while he secretly wonders how he ended up in this situation. All he can do is sit there awkwardly and reply politely. Moments later, our protagonist is stunned. He never expected her to have such a hearty appetite. Then again, it makes sense considering she works out after work. The thought immediately makes him flustered as he wonders why that even crossed his mind. Noticing his expression, she asks if he is not going to eat. He quickly jolts back to reality and starts eating. The entire time, he remains secretly anxious. He cannot tell whether she recognizes him or remembers the incident from the previous day. Unable to hold it in any longer, he asks why she invited him out for lunch. She playfully replies that if she tells him, he will probably end up with indigestion. Our protagonist instantly breaks into a sweat, convinced her comment is somehow related to yesterday's incident. However, she simply wonders why he seems so nervous. Imsiono struggles because he cannot read her at all. Even more shocking, she decides to wait until he finishes eating. Our protagonist thanks her and takes his time, and yes, while she waits, she keeps looking at him. That only makes him even more anxious. Convinced that if this continues, he really will end up with indigestion. Once he finishes his meal, Choi Haesian suggests they go for a stroll. Naturally, our protagonist agrees. Later, they grab drinks, and the entire time he stays silent, completely fascinated with his cup. Choi Haesian finally breaks the awkward silence by recalling that he majored in art. As usual, he gives a one-word reply. Curious, she asks if he studied design. He shakes his head and explains that he actually majored in comics and webtoons. Her eyes immediately light up as she excitedly reveals that she loves comics. Our protagonist is caught completely off guard when she suddenly declares that their first brainstorming session will be held at a comic cafe. Now he is completely confused about what is happening. Seeing his reaction, she pauses for a moment. Then she smiles and explains that it is for their content task force team. Our protagonist freezes for a second, trying to process what he just heard. He cannot understand why he would be part of the content task force team. As it turns out, the higher-ups have launched a new project, and they want each department to handle its own product marketing through social media. Our protagonist points out the obvious. Isn't that the marketing team's job? She agrees that it normally is. However, she explains that the current marketing team is too old school. Hearing that, our protagonist remembers the conversation she had with their team leader. She continues explaining that they will source, create, and curate all the content themselves. From the excitement in her voice, our protagonist can immediately tell she is definitely the one who volunteered for this project. That certainly suits her personality. She then asks what he thinks about the idea. Our protagonist pretends to take a sip from his cup, only to bite the cup instead, as if that alone could express his frustration. So this is the real reason she invited him to lunch. The woman is a complete workaholic. Thanks to her, he has already been trapped in endless overtime, and now this. Although he admits that he admires her, he knows he has to draw a clear line and speak his mind. But before he can say anything, she makes an unexpectedly cute expression and asks if he will join her. Our protagonist is completely caught off guard and embarrassed. No straight man could possibly say no to a face like that. In the end, he can only agree while crying inwardly. Later that day, after work, our protagonist replays everything that happened. Although things took an unexpected turn, he is relieved that she never suspected anything about the previous day's incident. Unfortunately, she is also his neighbor, and now, the two of them are stuck on the same team. The moment he mutters that this is bad, she suddenly appears beside him and asks what he is talking about. Our protagonist nearly jumps out of his skin, wondering what she is doing there when she is supposed to be at an external meeting. She casually replies that the meeting was canceled. Regardless, she quickly returns to the topic and asks why he was muttering that things were bad. Before she can press any further, our protagonist hurriedly says goodbye and tries to leave. But that is when she suddenly stops him. Our protagonist's day just keeps getting more interesting. She suggests that they head home together, pointing out that they both live in the same direction. Naturally, our protagonist wants to know how she knew, and more importantly, why she kept it from him all day. She lets go of his hand before asking why he looks so surprised. Our protagonist genuinely has nothing to say. He considers apologizing, but immediately dismisses the idea, thinking it might only lead to more misunderstandings. While he is busy arguing with himself, she concludes that he simply did not see her. Our protagonist even fidgets with his fingers like a nervous child. Then she speaks as if she has finally realized what happened. He did not see her when she greeted him. Our protagonist freezes in shock. So yesterday she was not waving at his cat. She was actually saying hello to him. He cannot help thinking how pathetic it was to spend an entire day worrying over something so insignificant. On the bright side, he no longer has anything to worry about. Just then, she continues talking, sounding almost as if she is complaining that he is always in a hurry with his headset on. Putting everything together, Our protagonist realizes she has actually known about him for quite a long time. Meanwhile, she casually adds that it is fine, as long as she was not being ignored because she made him uncomfortable. Our protagonist is left speechless. When she mistakes his silence for confirmation that he has been ignoring her, he immediately tells her it is the complete opposite. She smiles and says she is glad to hear that. With that, she turns to him and suggests that they start heading home together from now on. She flashes the brightest smile imaginable, and just like that, our protagonist is in serious trouble. Not long afterward, her phone suddenly buzzes with a message. She checks the screen and sighs, clearly finding the timing inconvenient. Our protagonist watches as she explains that she cannot go home yet because she has to return to the office. Even at such a late hour, she apologizes and promises they will walk home together next time. Our protagonist simply stands there, speechless, watching her figure disappear into the distance. Oddly enough, he feels relieved. At the same time, he also feels a little disappointed. Later, our protagonist returns home. He lies down on his bed, and as expected, the day has completely exhausted him. Even so, he cannot help smiling. The best part of his day was undoubtedly spending time with Choi Haesian. It also feels as though he learned something new about her. Thinking about her, he decides to check on her apartment. Seeing it completely dark, he realizes she must still be at work. Now our protagonist does not even understand why he decided to check on her in the first place. Then a horrifying thought suddenly crosses his mind. If he starts working with her, his life will eventually become exactly like hers. In other words, he will not even make it home in time to take care of his cat. Naturally, our protagonist adores his little furball. Because of that, he decides he will tell her exactly how he feels the next time they meet. However, the moment he imagines her icy stare and how she could make his life miserable at work, he immediately loses his courage. In the end, he concludes that the only real solution is to change jobs. The next scene shifts to the following morning. Our protagonist has just stepped out of the elevator when he notices his female coworker, Anna, standing in a corner. From her pale expression alone, he can tell something is wrong. The moment she sees him, she marches straight over and asks if it is true. Our protagonist is completely confused. Instead of explaining, she repeatedly calls him an idiot. Now he is utterly lost and asks what is going on. She tells him they are doomed. Then she points toward their office. When our protagonist follows her finger, his expression immediately changes. At first, he is simply confused, wondering why someone is setting up a desk right beside his. That is when his boss finally notices him. Since they are going to be on the same team, she took the initiative to move her desk right next to his. In the next chapter, our protagonist gives more insight into Choi Haesian. While she is the head of the product planning team, he and Anna belong to the design team, where they handle all the design requests for product planning. Since both teams naturally work closely together, their desks were already placed near Choi Haesian's team. Because of that, she often felt more like his boss than just the leader of another team. Even so, our protagonist explains that there was always a clear line separating the two teams. However, seeing her move her desk right next to his, it is obvious that line is slowly disappearing. In response, Choi Haesian casually explains that it is simply for their project. It would be inconvenient to keep walking back and forth whenever she needed to discuss something, and direct messages could only accomplish so much. As for our protagonist, he thinks he is completely screwed. Later, she begins discussing their advertisements. She says they are far too obvious and wants something that will stay in the minds of customers. As he listens, our protagonist cannot help thinking her request is like telling someone to lose weight without dieting. Still, she points out that simple product images with short captions are lazy and uninspiring, while videos require too much time and maintenance. That is why she suggests using Instatoons similar to webtoons and comics. Since our protagonist majored in comics, she naturally wants him to take charge. Unfortunately, her request brings back an unpleasant memory. It turns out our protagonist was once rejected because a girl believed his major had no future and hoped he would understand. Because of that experience, he tells Choi Haesian that he really does not want to draw anymore. His answer catches her completely off guard. An awkward silence fills the room. Realizing what he has just said, he quickly flinches and tries to cover it up. He explains that he simply meant he is rusty since he has only been doing graphic design at work. Seeing this, Choi Haesian gently places a hand on his shoulder and tells him it is fine. She explains that they can always hire an illustrator later. What matters most to her is having him support the project. Our protagonist has absolutely no idea what she means by that, so he simply agrees on the surface. Either way, she points out that before hiring an illustrator, they at least need a concept to present. She immediately starts scribbling the idea she came up with that morning. When she shows the sketch to our protagonist, he honestly has no idea what he is looking at. Even the translator seems completely confused. Meanwhile, Choi Haesian eagerly waits for his opinion. When he admits he cannot understand the drawing, she assumes he is teasing her. He honestly insists that he genuinely has no idea what he is looking at. Choi Haesian is left speechless. She wonders how he cannot understand it when she even won an art competition as a child. That only makes our protagonist wonder what kind of competition she won with drawing skills like those. Even so, he decides to show her how an illustrator approaches a storyboard. He explains that the goal is to communicate the message clearly, rather than focusing on every tiny detail. Once he finishes, he shows her his sketch. Choi Haesian is genuinely amazed. She wonders how he managed to create something like that out of nowhere. She tells him she wishes she could draw like him because it would make pitching ideas so much easier. For example, if someone simply says stylish sunglasses, everyone will imagine something different. A storyboard helps everyone picture the exact same idea. With that settled, she officially puts our protagonist in charge of the storyboards. He agrees on the surface. Deep down, however, he tells himself this will be a one-time thing. At that moment, Anna deliberately coughs. Her exaggerated coughing is basically a signal that she and our protagonist need to talk outside. Once they step outside, our protagonist explains everything that has happened. Anna listens with a slightly skeptical look before asking if all of this really started because of a single lunch. He explains that it was not like that and admits it was difficult for him to say no. Before he can continue, she cuts him off and reminds him that they belong to the design team. However, he points out that Choi Haesian already acts like their team leader anyway. Anna cannot deny that. Still, both of them agree they do not like the idea of Choi Haesian sitting with them. When our protagonist insists he dislikes it the most, Anna simply gives him a skeptical look and points out how cozy the two of them seemed while chatting. Our protagonist is completely stunned. At least she is not getting the wrong idea. Or so he thinks. Instead, she teasingly says that Asian guys are total suckers for Teto girls. When our protagonist quickly denies it, she cuts him off and says she will only cooperate under one condition. Anna makes it perfectly clear that she does not want any extra work added to her schedule. Our protagonist argues that Choi Haesian would never go that far. Anna immediately points out that this project is supposed to be temporary, so there is no reason for anyone to move their desk. In other words, she has no intention of getting dragged into Choi Haesian's team and working overtime. Seeing how serious she is, our protagonist promises that he will not let that happen. As he walks away, he cannot help thinking how exhausting this entire situation has become. To make matters even worse, even Choi Haesian's former teammates hope our protagonist keeps her occupied for a very long time. Our protagonist may be a beta male, but he is not a fool. He gets the message immediately. However, when he looks over at Choi Haesian's desk, he begins wondering if he is seeing things. It turns out she has been desperately trying to recreate his drawing. Even after tracing the lines, she somehow fails miserably. Our protagonist stares blankly at the result, wondering if she even understands what tracing line for line means. But that is not even the most surprising part. Apparently, desperate times call for desperate measures. She suddenly asks our protagonist to teach her how to draw. The request leaves him completely speechless. Since they cannot do it during work hours, she suggests starting the following day. Our protagonist quickly reminds her that the following day is the weekend. She simply smiles and says she knows. Seeing that smile, our protagonist cannot help wondering if this is somehow turning into a date. We skip to the following day. Our protagonist thinks to himself that he actually came. Of course, he feels unsettled. It is one thing to meet a coworker on the weekend, but meeting his boss is a completely different story. He honestly doesn't understand how she keeps roping him into things he would normally never do. Although she claims she wants to learn how to draw, our protagonist once again wonders if this doesn't already count as a date. He shakes his head, dismissing the thought. There is no way she would be interested in someone like him. After all, someone like her must have countless guys lining up to give her lollipops, and yes, we are talking about the actual sweets. Now our protagonist begins to wonder if his attraction to her really stems from him being an Asian-type guy. If that's the case, he believes she would never be interested in him, meaning he shouldn't get his hopes up. Just then, someone interrupts his thoughts. Our protagonist freezes as she mentions that he came early. She had actually wanted to arrive first so she could wait for him. Somehow, she always manages to take his breath away. Still flustered, our protagonist explains that he only just arrived. She smiles after hearing that, and asks if they should head to their first drawing lesson, cheerfully insisting that he lead the way. He agrees, but once again thinks to himself that he really is an Egen type guy. Later, inside a cafe, she proudly explains that she drew a smiley face. Seeing the rather awful drawing, our protagonist still comments positively, noting that the smile is huge. Feeling dejected, she says she tried her best, and thinks she is simply a lost cause. Remaining positive, our protagonist tells her that she is definitely making progress. Besides, the main lesson today is getting the idea across, so he suggests loosening up and keeping the drawing simple. She agrees and even becomes fired up, declaring that she will crush it this time. With that, she becomes completely serious and goes back to drawing. Once again, he finds himself staring at her. She notices and asks if there is something on her face. He quickly replies that there isn't. Instead, he suggests that she keep things simple while showing her a small illustration. She leans closer and admits she is amazed by how effortlessly our protagonist creates something so cute. Imsiono finds it ironic. Not long ago, he thought she saw him as a complete creep. However, he doesn't get to finish his thoughts. She suddenly calls out to him, snapping him back to reality. When she asks if he is in the mood to eat, our protagonist simply says he is fine with anything. Excited. She almost gets right in his face and says she feels the same, but there is something he absolutely has to try. When our protagonist wonders what she means, she tells him she is in the mood for some beers, and just like that, the next scene takes us to a bar. After finishing her glass, Choi Hae-sun lets out a satisfied sigh, saying it really hits the spot. She thanks our protagonist for teaching her how to draw and for grabbing drinks with her, which he doesn't mind at all. After all, she is also doing him a favor. It turns out that the previous day, our protagonist promised to teach her how to draw. In exchange, she agreed to make sure Anna wouldn't be assigned to the task force project. Back at the bar, Choi Hae-sun admits that now that she thinks about it, our protagonist and Anna seem to be very close. Imsiono thinks it sounds strange when she puts it that way. They simply spend a lot of time together because they work side by side. For some reason, Choi Hae-sun seems slightly annoyed by that answer, so she points out that since she is sitting next to him now, she guesses the two of them can also be considered close. Our protagonist doesn't even know how to respond to that. Instead, she asks if there isn't anything he is curious about. He looks surprised as she explains that she is willing to answer any question he has, considering it her treat for him teaching her how to draw. Im Soyono thinks about it, although he wants to know why she specifically dragged him into that project. What he wants to know even more is how long she has known they live so close to each other. Honestly, she was expecting him to ask something else. After all, both of them are heading home together anyway, so she would have told him eventually. Our protagonist is stunned because he assumed they would be parting ways after this. As if reading his mind, Choi Hae-sun explains that today isn't a work day, and they aren't at the office. Because of that, she wants our protagonist to stop addressing her so formally and suggests using different names during their drawing lessons. Only then does our protagonist realize this isn't going to be a one-time thing. Seeing the look on his face, Choi Hae-sun suddenly calls him Coach Seonho. Our protagonist immediately tells her that it feels a little too intense. In response, she tells him to lean closer. When he does, she softly calls him by his name and asks if that feels better. Our protagonist's heart begins to beat faster as he wonders why she wants to call him by his first name. They were just hanging out, and now she also wants him to address her by her name. As usual, he thinks this is crossing a line since they are co-workers, and he begins to overthink everything. In the end, he blurts out the first thing that comes to mind, only to realize he has just screwed up. The atmosphere immediately turns awkward as Choi Hae-sun tells him she was simply joking when he agreed to call her by her name. She even begins teasing his response, while our protagonist quickly explains that it is not what he meant. To cover his embarrassment, he quickly drinks all of his beer. After emptying his glass, he tells her that what he actually meant was that if she wanted to drop the formalities, he understood. She freezes as our protagonist formally addresses her as Miss Hae-sun. He reasons that it is only proper because she is his superior at work. However, the moment he mentions that she is older than him, she immediately asks what he is talking about. Her expression changes instantly as she asks if he is implying that she is old. Our protagonist immediately realizes his mistake. He naturally assumed she was older because of her leadership role. Because of this, he frantically tries to explain himself. Unfortunately, he feels as though every word he says only makes the situation worse. In the end, he accidentally calls her a person in power. Of course, she finds the remark amusing. She eventually laughs, noting that our protagonist is really funny, while he freezes from sheer awkwardness. Now turning serious, Choi Haesian asks him directly if she makes him uncomfortable. Our protagonist does his best to deny it. However, his expression gives him away, leading her to point out how uncomfortable he looks, to the point that he cannot even give a proper response. Hearing that, our protagonist begins sweating. Fortunately, she simply finds him amusing. In the end, she says that our protagonist is basically telling her she is great at her job, which she takes as a compliment before suggesting they finish their drinks. The next scene takes us outside, where Choi Haesian finds the cool night breeze perfect. Turning to our protagonist, she asks if he had a good time, and he immediately agrees. Meanwhile, the entire time, he has secretly been observing their surroundings, hoping they do not run into any of their coworkers. Naturally, he is anxious, so he wonders if Choi Haesian feels the same way. Unfortunately for him, she does not. Instead, she is more concerned that her favorite cookies are sold out. That makes our protagonist conclude that he is simply overthinking things anyway. She suddenly remembers that our protagonist has a cat. Naturally, he is shocked and wonders how she knows. Well, it turns out she overheard his previous conversation with Anna about a cat promo tree, and she had actually been considering having their task force team manage it. However, she pauses mid-sentence and playfully apologizes for bringing up work during their day off. When our protagonist says he does not mind, she continues talking about the promotion and her idea of creating a cat mascot. She then turns to him, hoping he will teach her how to draw a cat. However, our protagonist turns down the idea. He quickly explains that it is not that difficult, and that he can simply make one himself. Seeing this, she comments that although he always appears passive on the surface, he never says no whenever someone needs help. In addition, she explains that our protagonist is very attentive, using the way he labels his files according to the team's naming convention as an example. She continues by saying that he would be surprised by how few people follow something so basic. That is the reason she wanted our protagonist on her team. And just like that, he finally gets his answer as to why he ended up on the team without even trying. In the end, he simply thanks her for thinking so highly of him. Meanwhile, the two of them finally reach a particular spot. Our protagonist does not understand why they stopped, so she explains that this is the place where she always loses sight of him. She often sees him climbing the stairs, but by the time she makes it across the bridge, he is already coming down the other side, making it impossible for her to keep up. Furthermore, she mentions that she has noticed our protagonist frequently visiting the cake shop across the road. He listens as she explains that this is how she figured out they must be living in the same neighborhood. Her theory immediately makes our protagonist realize that she does not actually know where he lives. She also reveals that she moved into the neighborhood 2 weeks ago and suggests that they head home together. Im Zeonho cannot let that happen because she will definitely find out where he lives. Thinking quickly, he is about to come up with an excuse when she suddenly notices someone. He freezes as well because neither of them expected this. That is because both of them spot their coworker Anna, who looks genuinely surprised to see them together. Just like that, the atmosphere turns a little awkward. Anna breaks the awkward tension by pointing out the coincidence of running into them. Our protagonist immediately panics. If he doesn't come up with an explanation quickly, she could easily get the wrong idea. Thinking fast, he asks Anna what she is doing here. She replies that she has just come out of a cake shop. The cake there is extremely popular and trending right now. Coincidentally, it is the same shop our protagonist usually visits. Anna blinks in confusion when our protagonist claims that they were just heading there. Turning to Choi Haesian, he quickly explains that they coincidentally ran into each other and decided to head to the shop together. After saying that, he silently hopes she plays along. Thankfully, she does, reassuring Anna that it is simply a coincidence. However, Anna points out that if they are going there to buy the cake, they are probably too late. Reservations have to be made the previous day, and getting one is incredibly difficult. Our protagonist has no idea how to respond, but Choi Haesian confidently steps in. She reminds him that he mentioned he had somewhere else to be. In other words, he can leave while she takes care of booking reservations for both of them. With that, she bids the two of them farewell. Our protagonist remains silent while Anna waves goodbye. The next scene takes us to a bus stop. While Anna chats about the popular cake and how surprising it was to run into Choi Haesian, our protagonist quietly breathes a sigh of relief. At least nothing went wrong in the end, and Anna never followed him to his apartment building. The very next moment, He is caught completely off guard when she suddenly admits that she mistook him and Choi Haesian for a couple. Our protagonist immediately tells her that's impossible. Looking skeptical, Anna points out that Choi Haesian suddenly moved her desk closer to his, and now the two of them are heading out together to buy dessert. The way she describes it would make anyone think the same. Even so, our protagonist insists that they simply ran into each other by coincidence. Anna quickly points out that the more anxious he acts, the more suspicious he looks. So when she asks once again if they really went on a date, our protagonist reflects on everything that has happened and the time he has spent with Choi Haesian. Looking back on it, it really does feel a little like a date. His thoughts are interrupted when Anna points out that his face has turned bright red. Now he is practically begging her to believe that it was all just a coincidence. However, Anna laughs and admits that she believes him. She was only teasing him because his reaction was too funny. Before long, her bus arrives. She says it's a shame because she wanted to stay a little longer. Then she mentions that Choi Haesian is a Teto girl, and our protagonist realizes she means someone he would naturally be attracted to. When Anna asks what he thinks, our protagonist pauses for a moment before replying that he only sees Choi Haesian as his boss. Now he is the one left confused when Anna says that's a relief. She explains that he and Choi Haesian have suddenly become much closer over the last few days, and after thinking about the chart, she started feeling a little anxious. Since our protagonist is an Ijin guy, she assumed he would naturally be interested in Choi Haesian. The real reason she says all this is because she felt a little jealous seeing him spending time with another woman. Of course, our protagonist has no idea what she really means. Nonetheless, when her bus finally pulls up to the stop, she hands him a small gift as thanks for waiting with her. She adds that the dessert is incredibly difficult to get and isn't something she would casually give to just anyone. With that, the bus drives away while our protagonist continues staring at the cake in his hands. The next scene takes us to his apartment. Our protagonist stares at the cupcake, unable to understand why getting one is supposedly so difficult. But what confuses him even more is what Anna meant when she said she felt jealous seeing him spend time with Choi Haesian. Just then, a message from Choi Haesian snaps him out of his thoughts. He replies, and to everyone's surprise, she has saved his contact as ultra-handsome guy. Anyway, she realizes from his reply that he is already home. Moments later, his phone buzzes again. Our protagonist reads the message and sees that she wants to try the cake because of all the glowing online reviews. Besides, as they already know, getting one is extremely difficult. When he tells her that he is actually eating one right now, she is naturally shocked. Her reply comes almost instantly, asking if he can share it with her. Im Seonho wonders how that would even be possible. That thought makes her smile. She gives him two options. Either she comes over to his place, or he goes to hers. Our protagonist's heart rate immediately increases, and he wonders why she would suggest something like that at a time like this. Remembering how interested she was in the trending cupcake, he begins typing a response when she suddenly sends another message. Of course, it was only a joke. She even comments that she can already picture the look on his face. Our protagonist practically collapses to the ground, thinking that this is exactly what he should have expected. Because of that, he decides to leave the cupcake in the fridge, noting to himself that Choi Haesian will definitely give him a heart attack one day. The next scene skips to the following day. Our protagonist is busy working as usual. Today, Choi Haesian decides to stay at her actual desk. He watches her expression as she reprimands a coworker for sending only one email to a client without following up. Watching her in work mode is honestly terrifying. Unfortunately, her decision to stay at her own desk creates a problem for him. After all, he has the cupcake she has been craving, but he is not sure when he will find the right opportunity to give it to her. Suddenly, Anna appears beside him, startling him in the process. When she asks what happened, our protagonist simply tells her that it is nothing. Anyway, he notices that she came in late today. She explains that she had to stop by the bank, which took longer than expected. She then asks him how it tasted. When he looks confused, she explains that she is talking about the cupcakes she gave him on Saturday. Our protagonist realizes he almost forgot about them. Still, he honestly admits that he has not tried them yet, leaving her a little surprised. Nonetheless, she heads off to drop off some documents, telling him that it is just dessert, so it is not like it is going anywhere. As she walks away, she and Choi Haesian exchange greetings. Meanwhile, Choi Haesian rubs her forehead after dealing with her team all morning. She thinks all the stress is making her crave something sweet. So when she overhears Anna talking to a coworker about the trending cupcakes, the poor woman is practically on the verge of tears as she realizes she is probably the only person in the office who has not tried one. If only she had known earlier, she would have done everything she could to reserve one before they sold out at every cake shop. Her train of thought is interrupted when she notices someone approaching. When she sees that it is our protagonist, she looks slightly surprised. Without saying much, our protagonist simply hands her a bag. The moment he opens it and reveals the contents, Choi Hae-seon almost starts drooling at the sight of the famous cupcake. Her reaction only makes our protagonist even more nervous. She gasps in disbelief, unable to believe that he is actually giving one to her. But at that exact moment, our protagonist notices Anna watching from a distance. Knowing this could easily lead to a huge misunderstanding, he immediately turns around and walks away. Poor Choi Hae-seon is left standing there in complete confusion, eventually concluding that our protagonist only came over to show off the fact that he managed to get one. Later that day, she is the only one left in the office. Suddenly, she receives an email. The attachment contains the cat mascot our protagonist promised to send her. As expected, she finds it absolutely adorable, noting to herself that her ultra-handsome guy never disappoints. However, the longer she stares at the mascot, the more familiar it begins to look. The next scene shifts to our protagonist's apartment. He is busy doing something when his phone suddenly starts ringing. He sees that Choi Hae-seon is calling. He cannot understand why she would call this late, and assumes she probably wants to talk about the sketch he sent earlier. However, the moment he answers, she screams from the other end of the line, saying that there is a cat outside his balcony and asking if everything is all right. At first, our protagonist is completely confused by what she is saying. Then it suddenly hits him. He left the balcony door open, and his cat must have sneaked outside. He immediately rushes to the balcony while calling out for Mansu. There he finds his cat casually sitting on the railing. He instantly becomes furious, scolding the cat for putting itself in such a dangerous situation. It is at that very moment that someone speaks. Of course, that person just happens to be his boss. Choi Hae-seon finally realizes that the mascot he designed was actually modeled after his cat. When he sees that it is her, he does not respond. That prompts her to point out that he has not said anything, making her wonder if that means he already knew she lived there. Our protagonist tries to explain, but she goes on to reveal how she figured it out. In the end, he realizes that she only discovered he was her neighbor because of Mansu and the cat mascot he sent her. He never expected to subconsciously draw his own cat. Without realizing it, she quietly comments that our protagonist is actually cute. Now she begins teasing him as usual. But Imsiono quickly tries to explain that it is not like that. It turns out he was never pretending not to know she lived there. He simply did not want to make things awkward. She does not understand, so he explains that their personal lives should remain separate from work. When she teases him again, wondering if that is just another excuse, our protagonist is left speechless. Nonetheless, he is caught off guard when she admits that she actually likes the idea of them being neighbors. She sincerely tells him that it does not bother her in the slightest. As she watches his stunned reaction, she suddenly notices something else. Apparently, this is the first time she has seen him without his glasses. Hearing that, our protagonist decides not to continue the conversation. He simply wishes her good night and heads back inside. She tries to stop him, insisting that he stay and chat a little longer. However, our protagonist has already shut the balcony door. As he reflects on everything she said, he decides that he cannot trust himself around her. Just then, his doorbell rings. When he opens the front door, he finds a package waiting outside. Meanwhile, over at Choi Hae-seon's apartment, she finds herself thinking about our protagonist. He really has the Clark Kent effect. She concludes that he is even more handsome without his glasses. The next scene takes us to the following morning. As usual, our protagonist leaves early to head to work. This time, Choi Hae-seon catches him and asks why he is leaving so early. Naturally, our protagonist is startled to see her. She immediately grows suspicious and asks if he is leaving early just to avoid running into her. He quickly denies it while secretly wondering if she can read minds. Looking at her outfit, our protagonist realizes she has just finished her morning workout before work and quietly admires her self-discipline. She invites him to have breakfast together. However, our protagonist immediately turns her down. As he starts walking toward work, she wonders why he rejected her so suddenly. Nonetheless, she reminds him that they have fieldwork scheduled today and will be meeting with a video editing agency. Our protagonist is surprised to hear that, but he quickly replies that he will be ready. With that, she waves goodbye and heads off to prepare for work. Our protagonist can only complain inwardly. because this means he will probably be working late again. The next scene shifts to a meeting room. Our protagonist sits beside his boss as she discusses the project with a representative from the video editing agency. The two of them handle most of the conversation, while our protagonist quietly sits there typing away on his laptop. Eventually, the meeting comes to an end, and they agree to continue the discussion through email. Outside the meeting room, Choi Hae-seon stretches her arms. She then looks at our protagonist and comments that this must be his first off-site meeting. Our protagonist agrees, thinking to himself that he should head back to the office because he is already exhausted. Choi Hae-seon checks her watch before mentioning that she has another meeting to attend. When she tells our protagonist to head back to the office first, he celebrates inwardly, thinking he is finally free. Unfortunately for him, she was only joking. She insists that he come along because it will be fun. And just like that, our protagonist finds himself dragged into another part of her job. It also includes something he never expected. It turns out this meeting goes completely wrong. Our protagonist silently watches from the side as Choi Hae-seon is relentlessly yelled at by a client. The man angrily calls them a bunch of scammers. Despite the insults, she remains completely calm and politely asks him to at least give them a chance to explain. Instead, the man tells her to shut up and even raises his hand as if he is about to hit her. Fed up with the situation, our protagonist immediately steps in front of her. The man frowns in irritation and demands to know what he plans to do. Our protagonist keeps a serious expression while silently wondering why his body moved on its own. Of course, Choi Hae-seon is taken by surprise by what she sees. Meanwhile, our protagonist stands his ground, which only makes the man even more furious. Just before things can escalate, someone grabs the man by the ear. Both our protagonist and Choi Hae-seon are momentarily stunned. The person turns out to be the man's mother, who questions the way he is treating their clients. Turning to Choi Hae-seon, she apologizes for her son's behavior, explaining that this is not how she raised him. Following his mother's instructions, the man offers a half-hearted apology. That earns him a smack on the head. Bro is lucky she doesn't use a slipper. Anyway, he eventually apologizes properly. The woman then takes them to her office. She gets straight to business, expressing her disappointment that Choi Hae-seon's company stopped their promotion because her sales failed to meet the target. This causes Choi Hae-seon to apologize. Crossing her arms, the woman explains that she is willing to trust them one last time. She insists that Choi Hae-seon have their marketing department restart the promotion beginning next week. Hearing this, Choi Hae-seon thanks the woman for placing her trust in them and promises to personally oversee the campaign, which surprises our protagonist, considering she already has plenty of work on her plate. The woman appreciates the commitment, but then glances at our protagonist. She remarks that Choi Hae-seon brought along a man with plenty of fire. When our protagonist remains silent, Choi Hae-seon immediately nudges him. That causes him to apologize at once. Later, outside, our protagonist feels completely drained and regrets not staying back at the office. Meanwhile, Choi Hae-seon apologizes for getting him caught up in the product planning team's mistake, but he insists it was no problem. She further explains that the woman they met is not usually like that. She was simply upset. Even so, she doesn't forget to thank our protagonist for having her back. She even jokes that he looked like her bodyguard back there. In reality, our protagonist thinks to himself that his legs were shaking so badly, it felt like his soul had left his body. Nonetheless, she invites him out for a treat, while our protagonist realizes that today he learned a lot about Choi Hae-seon outside the office. The next scene takes us to a cafe. Our protagonist watches her work and suggests that she shouldn't forget to eat. She apologizes and insists that he go ahead and eat without worrying about her, while she continues working. This causes our protagonist to reflect on how she kept working even while they were in the cab. It's almost as if she never takes a break, and he wonders how she manages to keep going like this. While lost in his thoughts, she suddenly grabs a donut and begins devouring it, making our protagonist insist that she slow down. And just like that, we skip forward. Choi Hae-seon suddenly informs our protagonist that she needs to head back to the office. It turns out she has been pulled into an intense sales meeting at the last minute. However, he points out that it is already after work hours. In response, she stands up and explains that it is simply bad timing. She leaves the cafe, thanking our protagonist for accompanying her and hoping he gets home safely. However, our protagonist has something else on his mind. She is caught off guard when he tells her that he will be staying behind to work for a while. When she asks what he said, he simply tells her to forget about it. With that, she leaves, hoping to see him tomorrow. Meanwhile, our boy just sits back in the cafe, wondering what he is even doing. The scene skips to nighttime, and Choi Hae-seon is clearly trying to keep herself together after a grueling day at work. Eventually, she arrives at the same cafe where she and our protagonist ate earlier. Remembering what he said, she assumes he must have gone home by now. Still, she checks the cafe. When she doesn't see anyone, the hope in her eyes fades. She had already figured he wouldn't still be there and decides to order something instead. But in the very next moment, she freezes. Our protagonist has actually waited for her the entire time. She is about to ask him Soyono what he is doing there, but our protagonist immediately asks if she is okay. She brushes it off, insisting that she is completely fine. However, it turns out she has been drinking, and our protagonist can tell she is not exactly sober. He points out that it is obvious because she is wobbling on her feet, and her face is bright red. Feeling a little embarrassed, she claims she has no idea what he is talking about. Because of this, our protagonist hands her some hangover medicine. She is surprised that he is giving it to her. Trying to tease him, she asks if he really waited for her just to give her this. She freezes when our protagonist doesn't deny it. He adjusts his glasses while trying to say something. In the end, he decides to simply hand it over instead of trying to explain himself. When she sees him pull a bag out of his backpack, she wonders what it is. It turns out our protagonist came prepared. She wonders if they are ice packs. When he doesn't respond, Choi Hae-seon grows even more curious and assumes it is a rice ball. However, when our protagonist tells her to open it, she is stunned. Inside are the trendy cupcakes. Each one is incredibly difficult to get, yet our protagonist has prepared 4 of them just for her. He quickly explains that he didn't actually buy them. Scratching his head, he admits that he made them himself using the baking kit that was delivered to his doorstep earlier. After he explains that some of the original cupcakes are expensive while others are nearly impossible to get, she understands why he chose to make them himself instead. Even so, she still can't believe he made them specifically for her. In response, he tells her that he enjoyed the cupcakes so much that he decided to try making them himself. He also assures her that they taste very close to the real ones, so she should give them a try. Hearing that, she immediately becomes guarded, thinking our protagonist is probably trying to tease her again like he did earlier at work. When he assures her that he isn't, she finally decides to take a bite. Meanwhile, our protagonist anxiously waits for her reaction. Of course, she finds the cupcakes absolutely delicious. Seeing her enjoy them, our protagonist feels relieved. As they get into a cab, he wonders why seeing her happy makes him happy as well. At the same time, he notices just how exhausted she is. She is so tired that she soon falls asleep, and her head keeps bumping against the window. Our protagonist decides to help her. But at that very moment, the cab suddenly swerves, causing her head to fall onto his shoulder. Of course, this is not what he expected. Since she is sleeping so peacefully, he can't bring himself to wake her up, and just like that, he lets her rest against him. Meanwhile, our boy's inner monologue keeps wondering why he can't stop thinking about her. Suddenly, the traffic light turns red, and the taxi comes to an abrupt stop. The driver immediately apologizes. At that moment, Choi Hae-seon wakes up. Honestly, the driver makes the perfect assist, and Choi Hae-seon finds herself wrapped in the arms of her ultra-handsome guy.